I'm very excited for our presenter tonight. And Brandon, I apologize if I slaughter some of the French pronunciations. But Dr. Ballengee is a visual artist and biologist and environmental educator. He's currently doing postdoctoral research in the Biological Sciences Department at LSU, and he specifically studies the impact on fish from the 2010 Gulf of Mexico oil spill. His artwork's previously been exhibited actually throughout the world, not just the United States, in more than 20 countries, and it's been featured in more publications in the US and abroad. He's been featured in New York Times Magazine, the Audubon Magazine, the New Yorker, to name a few, and recently in our byline that we have in the Advocate for the Master Naturalist. He and his wife and 2 children moved here from New York City, and they purchased 9 acres on an abandoned soybean field in Arnaudville to create Atelier de la Nature. I hope I said that right. And it's a preserve to educate the public about art, science, and food with respect for nature and the ecosystems. And I've been out there, and it truly is a magical place. And I'm sure he will touch base on that this evening. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us for Nature Notes. And so now I'm going to hand it over to you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's so nice to be able to speak with you all, and hope to someday in the near future get to meet many more of you in person. Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my own practice and a little bit about this very special moment in history we find ourselves in. The title of tonight's talk is called Ecoventions, Combining Science with Art to Inspire Conservation. It's not combing, that was a typo. Sorry about that. But really, I hope that you all enjoy the talk tonight, and please feel free to ask questions. I can't see questions showing up, that's one thing. So maybe if there's another way to communicate with me via Catherine or at the end, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and keep an eye on the chat box and let you know as questions are posed.
Very good. So just to start with, I use that term ecoventions, which for most folks is probably an unusual term, and I'll talk a little bit about its origin in just a minute. But that term eco, which gets used so much nowadays, I think I wanted to kind of just briefly talk a little bit about what is ecology, and also to point out this image at the bottom right, the famous blue marble image. This one's been enhanced. This is a little later than the original one, but how that picture was such a catalyst for what came later for our understanding of what ecology is. The general term, and most folks have kind of their own definition of what they consider ecology, and the branch of science, the terminology in science, which is also kind of, there's lots and lots of gray areas, but the 2 big things that I like to say when I'm talking to students about ecology is it's really about this relationships between organisms and their environment, and the way that really goes both ways, the way that organisms shape their environment and vice versa through natural selection, and then all these kind of really interesting things that we have now going through kind of post-natural adaptation via domestication and now biotechnology and all this. So it's the thing about it though is that tying in with relationship, and I love the term ecology and the origin of the word coming from the Greek term oikos, or home. And what's fascinating about this, it was coined actually by an artist, hybrid artist scientist named Ernst Haeckel. And if you're not familiar with Ernst Haeckel's art, I would like, please spend a few minutes just looking up some of those images. So Haeckel was what would be described today as a microbiologist, and even further as a plankton biologist, a phycologist. Though he studied other microorganisms, he really focused on diatoms. But one of the things about Eckel is he, using advanced technology for his day of microscopes that he would then alter and create his own, he would make these amazing illustrations, and they're just stunning. And so he felt that by creating these illustrations, it helped him learn his science. So he learned about the evolution of these species and their shape and change and what he called a complexity, through these drawings, through looking at them in the microscope and then illustrating them. And he also had another desire, which was to bring this kind of information to a large populace, to inspire people about nature. And he did this through a publication at the turn of the 20th century called Art Forms in Nature. And for its day, it was the first kind of large scale science book of its time in it was produced in Berlin, which using chromolithographic technology. So these brightly beautiful colored plates. And it was oversized, it was large. So when people saw it, it just was so spectacular and beautiful. It inspired the Art Nouveau art movement, design elements, but also, of course, inspired science. So I just like to talk about Eckel as a kind of early hybrid artist scientist, and then to zoom forward a little bit. As I said, it's such a special, strange and unusual and amazing moment in history to be alive. Here we find ourselves at the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and here we have another artist who spent quite a bit of time in Louisiana, Robert Rauschenberg. And Rauschenberg was commissioned to create the first poster for Earth Day on April 22nd, 1970. And Earth Day was really a response that started in the 1969 to the largest oil spill in history off the Santa Barbara coast. Um, so Rauschenberg and many artists of the day combined together, and they were really inspired. Once to go back to that blue marble image, I mean, you imagine the kind of all the different moving parts that led to the environmental movement. You've got Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring, which suddenly becomes this incredible tool for expressing awareness through this very poetic writing. And then you have artists like Robert Rauschenberg that are depicting these images. So at the time, as I'm sure many of you know, the bald eagle was an endangered species and was really under threat of extinction. And then all these other images with oil spills and damage to the earth. And so here we are 50 years later, um, finding ourselves in the middle of a global pandemic, which also relates in many ways to the way that we're treating our planet, which I'll try to move into at the end, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about it. But just this term ecovention and the term eco art, this is really something that since Rauschenberg's time, artists have been exploring more and more and more. So working with, collaborating with scientists, kind of fusing together art and ecology, meaning eco art, but also with community. So increasingly artists that are really at a grassroots level trying to work their way and inspire people towards conservation, either through visual artifacts or actions. And I'll try to show you some of the strategies that I employ. But this term ecovention is also used to describe ecology mixing with invention. So ecovention is another term that's used to describe eco art. And so what does it mean for us to be alive at this moment in history? I mean, we're in the middle of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, this zoonotic disease that's causing this global pandemic, and we're finding ourselves in a mass extinction event. So I just from my own perspective, like I became really interested in how you could use this combination of practices, which on one hand drives me to do my science because I'm really interested in doing the research and understanding the environmental phenomenon behind things like missing fish and deformed frogs. But then creating art about these experiences in lab in the field, but also trying to get people engaged and interested in conservation in their backyard. And the first step meaning like really kind of awareness, getting people out such as doing the Master Naturalist program, um, getting people engaged and looking and learning about the biodiversity in our backyard, and then learning more about how it's dwindling and how we might hopefully become inspired to protect it. So I really kind of wear all three hats professionally. And just, I wanted to show you one quick image. I'm not gonna have time to talk about my deformed frog work so much tonight, but maybe in a separate occasion we can meet, and I'd love to show you some of these images. But images like this really kind of, when I do this process and I chemically, I'm doing this biological clearing process, this chemical process to try to understand the development and what happened to this frog. But then I create art like this, which then kind of goes above and beyond the research and aims to inspire people. So this image, it was really interesting. I made it, and I was contacted by a museum in Slovenia. I was part of an exhibition, and they said, "Oh, would you mind if we used your frog image as the poster?" I thought, oh, well, yeah, that's fine. And I got there, and they'd made a huge billboard in the center of Maribor, which is the second largest city in Slovenia. So literally tens of thousands of people ended up seeing this deformed frog. And then I had to, use that as an opportunity to try to explain what had happened to this frog, how it was, something that happened in a complex ecosystem. And also so many of these frogs are disappearing. And so that's, for me, one of the great tools that art can do to captivate, inspire people, and then try to get them to slow down. And as I'm creating work like this, as I'm doing the research, another big part of what I'm interested in is the citizen science side, what I call eco actions. And as much as possible, even as I'm doing primary field research, I want to include the public. I want to make the science as open and accessible and in a way as democratic as possible. By working with folks, I'm able to train them a little bit about safe field techniques, but then learn from them about what they already know about those sites and the animals. So this is a field survey from a deformed frog study I was doing in the UK. This is from Ireland. But again, it's like we create these public events, often through cultural institutions, and invite folks to come and collect amphibians and fish and look and learn and try to do that research themselves. But the real goal, again, is to engage and inspire, and particularly with youth, to try to inspire youth to just realize how wonderful the biodiversity is around us, and how we really need to start thinking of active means to protect it. And so moments like this, finding individual frogs and then sharing that experience, something that most of us probably take for granted. You would be shocked. I'm sure many of you know this already, but some of you might just be shocked to realize how many children have never held a frog or a fish or an insect. There's a wonderful book called that describes the nature deficit disorder by Richard Liu, which is called Last Child in the Woods. If you're interested in this field of kind of how people and especially youth are being moved past nature or moved beyond nature, I highly recommend it. So that's one of the big goals. And as Catherine had said, my family and I moved to South Louisiana a little over 4.5 years ago. But prior to that, I'd spent quite a bit of time in Louisiana during the 2010 oil spill as a volunteer, and then later collecting specimens and doing documentation. Um, so this is the other really fascinating thing about this year that we find ourselves in. It's also the 10-year anniversary of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which has been, we just haven't had very little media coverage or conversation about that, just because of all that's happening right now. So the as far as the largest spills in U.S. history, this ranks probably the second. So there was the Santa Barbara spill, which was huge, which led to Earth Day. Then, of course, the Exxon Valdez, and then Deepwater Horizon. But there's another spill, which is slightly smaller by volume from what I understand, but ongoing, called the Taylor Energy spill, which is not so far from where the Macondo well was, which is ongoing now. It actually started before and continues today, but very few people seem to be aware of that. Anyway, so the 2010 spill. So, still by scale, considered probably the largest spill, at least in U.S. history for volume. And just to take a look, so this is between April 25th and July 16th, just satellite imagery. So this is just the plume itself. Now, when that oil is mixed and then spread, there were samples that were taken certainly in Panacea and all along the Florida coast and in the Keys, uh, where Deepwater Horizon spill was thought to have been collected, as well as the Texas coast and all the way as far south as southern Mexico. So we really don't know the full scale of that spill. Um, However, for those of us that were in Louisiana at the time or elsewhere, there was a great media campaign that really led us to believe that this phenomena had ended, that all the oil had been cleaned up. And in part, it was due to a multi-million-dollar media campaign that British Petroleum was doing as the spill was going on. They were actually there was a data that emerged that they were spending almost equal amounts on counter media to cleanup efforts, which is just unbelievable. But what we do know is, or what we think we know, is that a little over 200 million gallons were spilled. And then there's been push and pull back and forth about this, but it's around 200 million gallons. And a recent congressional report um, from 2013 said that about half that oil remains in the Gulf. So there was a tremendous cleanup effort, without a doubt. And to be fair, I mean, at a spill at this scale, at that depth, no one in human history had dealt with anything like this. So the fact that half of the oil being removed is frankly amazing. But the fact that half the oil remains in the Gulf of Mexico and we don't know what impact that's having to date really requires further research. Another very controversial thing that happened during the spill was the use of chemical dispersants. So the National Academy of Sciences fairly recently published a whole report on the use of chemical dispersants and studies that show that they're, in some cases, they can be quite toxic and make the oil itself far more toxic. But when the dispersants are used in the manner in which they're supposed to be used, it decreases risk. But unfortunately, in the case of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, what it meant is these chemical dispersants were mixing with the oil, and what they do is they molecularly break the oil, which naturally floats, and they break it apart into small, heavy molecules, which then sink. So that's where we have this kind of mystery state of where this oil is now. What is the true fate of the oil? So as this was all happening, these are some of the photos that were emerging and images that people were sending me of, oil stained snapper and unusual looking redfish and crabs with lesions and things like that. And this was more than a year after the spill. We began speculating, and I say speculating because this was a project called Collapse, which is an artwork. It's not a scientific study, though it's a artwork that I worked on in collaboration with three other biologists. So it was our way to kind of speculate our concern and to address our concern of what happens when those dispersants, those chemical dispersants, corrects it, mixes with the Macondo oil, and what happens when that enters a food chain as complex and dynamic as and so important like the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, the Gulf of Mexico in so many ways is like our Amazon rainforest. It's, really the Northern Caribbean, and it's just a huge amount of biodiversity, a nursery for tens and millions of organisms, and literally that spill killed billions. So what happens when that oil mixes? So this was the kind of sculptural response. And so this is an installation called Collapse. It's about 15 by 15 feet wide and 12 feet tall, and it's really just kind of a sketch. It's less than 2.5% of the known biodiversity in the Gulf of Mexico, and known. Now, this was done in back in 2010 through 12, so that number has gone up. So we know that it's even less than that. So if you imagine if you had another 97 and a half of these jars stacked all together, that would give you a closer idea of what's really living in the Gulf of Mexico, which is so fantastic. But what it was is 26,000 preserved specimens representing over 370 species. And so stacked, and part of the idea was they were all labeled. Um, Many of them they were bycatch, or I should say they were found dead after the spill. People were sending specimens to me. I was collecting some. Others came from seafood markets and things like that, just to fill in gaps. But the idea literally was to try to kind of give a visual form to the complexity of that trophic pyramid, of that food chain. And then also in between were empty jars to kind of represent species we were concerned that might be impacted from the spill or from overfishing or other environmental factors impacting the Gulf. So each one of these is connected. So it's didactic in that it's informed by science. And so literally some of these species would be consuming one another or producing to help connect one another. But also it's a visual artwork. So it's sculpture. So even though there was a guide to follow with Collapse, and there is a guide, you can look online and you can see what all the species are. And we're actually making a website now depicting all the jars. And but the thing is, when you're standing in front of it, you can't see more than 3 or 4 jars in. So it's part of that complexity and mystery that I really wanted to kind of convey is through a visual art form. And also showing them just amazing critters like this deep sea isopod, and just to kind of hopefully inspire and make people curious and frankly concerned about the state of the Gulf following the spill. This is one of the more interesting specimens. I think this is a one-eyed oil-stained shrimp with lesions that was sent to me by a shrimper in Alabama that needed to remain anonymous because he had signed a confidentiality agreement when taking a BP payment. But nonetheless, people were still wanting to express what they were finding in their catches. So this is one that was collected in 2012. Um, so continuing the visual works that related to this bill, this is another body of work that started as a result of it. This is something I called Ghosts of the Gulf. So I didn't explain the frog very well earlier. This is not an X-ray. It's actually a chemical process where I take a preserved specimen. I use a series of biological stains to adhere to specific tissue. So the red is calcium or calcified tissue, so bone, and the blue is cartilage. I then use a series of chemicals like trypsin, which is a digestive enzyme, and glycerol to then make the muscle tissue transparent and other tissues transparent. And it's called clearing and staining. And it's an old technique. I didn't invent it, though everybody that does clearing and staining has their own kind of special, recipe. And what these are is when I was collecting specimens or having, what specimens that people found, I wanted to clear and stain them to see if there were any kind of morphological malformations that would tell me why they died. And so I cleared and stained several different samples, and in the end, I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find anything unusual about their anatomy that was interesting from the scientific standpoint, but they were just so visually compelling that I wanted to somehow make portraits of them. So then I literally scanned them and photographed them and did this series called Ghosts of the Gulf. So most of these are actually done on a flatbed scanner. So literally taking a preserved specimen and putting it on a flatbed scanner and scanning it as high resolution as possible. And then what I do is I transfer that file to a commercial printer, and I had these printed in watercolor ink on handmade Japanese rice paper to look like the tradition of Japanese fish prints. This is a Florida pompano. And so, um, in a sense, what I was trying to do is to kind of make a memorial to each of these species that had been found dead, just some way of remembering them. So triggerfish, um, and also hopefully, kind of in a way, trying to bring them back in a way, like kind of like an animated ghost to be beautiful. I mean, I hope with all my work, I try. I'm very not interested in creating monsters or something scary. What I'm trying to induce is empathy and curiosity, and hopefully a connection between the viewer and that organism, and hopefully compel the viewer to want to learn more about what happened to them. How did they end up here? So to shift on to a more recent project, and this is actually something when we moved to Louisiana I started, this was a huge collaborative project called Crude Life, which was a real citizen science and art project about some of the biodiversity following the Deepwater Horizon spill. So you can see I was the PI on the project as a postdoctoral researcher at LSU. Um, Working with a whole team of artists and scientists and community members. And I'll explain a little bit more. From the science standpoint, what we started to do is we wanted to work with fish. So working with Prasanta Chakrabarti, the curator of fishes at LSU, Prasanta took me in as a postdoc, and we wanted to look at um, what impact we could find in those fishes. And what the Gulf of Mexico, as far as we know, has around 77 endemic fishes. These are fishes that are found in the Gulf and nowhere else on the planet. And so what we did is we looked through museum records, um, kind of before the spill and after the spill for more than a decade. And what we found is there were several of these endemics that were reported in collections, natural history collections, um, that were reported between 2000 and 2005, and 2005 to 2010. But then after 2010, we discovered 14 species that were missing, that hadn't been reported. So we started using that as our point of departure. We published this, and then the citizen science part started. And so I created these wanted posters, and I don't know how many hundred or maybe thousand I created, but I started giving these away to shrimpers and fishermen and put them up at marinas. And just we would do these activities where we would invite people to the lab and try to learn about these missing fish, but also encourage them, if they catch something, to say something, right? So take photos and send it in if it's bycatch. Please help us do this science. And to further that, working with a team of artists, I created these portable natural history cabinets, working with an artist from University of Florida, Gainesville, named Sean Miller. And Sean one of his practices is he specializes in creating portable galleries and museums. So I got Sean these old 19th century sea chests, and then working together, we kind of, along with curators at the LSU Museum of Natural Science, we literally curated this portable natural history museum that I could then take to nature reserves and small populations along the coast, just to give you an idea, like especially down in Plaquemines Parish and Grand Isle and Point au Chien, and bring these to festivals and events, and just kind of show up at a marina and pull out the sea chests and just start talking to people and giving those posters away. So this really became an olive branch to reach the community. So in this case, instead of a scientist showing up and saying, hey, have you seen these missing fish? I show up with this kind of art project and spark curiosity, and then just start to talk to people. Just, try to form a relationship. This guy's taking a shelfie with his deep sea isopod. This is in City Park in New Orleans. This is actually with the Acadiana Master Naturalist Group in Indian Bayou, which is kind of closer to our side of the Atchafalaya. And then in New Orleans, also using this as an opportunity to work with children and then their families in coastal areas. That's actually um, down in, I think, in Venice. And then I had the great opportunity to present this and our research on the missing fish and the findings about how much oil is in the Gulf to the Louisiana State Senate Natural Resources Committee, which was an amazing opportunity. As a scientist, I'm not sure I would have ever been able to do that. But as a kind of artist, I could set up this installation, meet the senators, talk to them, meet the press, and talk about how important these issues are, and try to talk also about how many things that we still, how we really hopefully need, government support for science, for research. And then luckily we found one of the missing species. So they're now, I think we're down to 13. And then I recently read a report that one of the other species has been found. Um, so I'm kind of now that's the next tier of this project is continuing this work. Oh, I just wanted to show you for a second. This is now this is just a quick snap of from 30th April to 30th June in 2017, how many people we were able to reach. So in my final report for the project, we had well over 5,000 people. And I thought that's just spectacular to be able to show up at these fishing rodeos and events and blessing the fleet ceremonies and breweries and different places and to meet so many people. It really was so beneficial and we learned so much. And that kind of activity is something I'm continuing with this current project. So currently I'm working on what those missing species are. So there's the dozen or so that are left since 2010, but it turns out there's an awful lot of other Gulf endemics that haven't been seen in decades, or they have been seen, but we know virtually nothing about them. So using this kind of same citizen science and art model, I'm starting this, I've been working on this new project called Searching for Ghosts of the Gulf. So it literally, again, is involving these public field trips, trying to set those up, um, going out with specimens again, but also creating new artwork, and then working in the Tulane University Fish Collection and the Smithsonian Natural Fish Collections. Those are the two largest fish collections on the planet. The Tulane University Fish Collection is pretty much tied with the Smithsonian. Um, and it's in Belchase in Plaquemines Parish, which is one of the parishes I'm focusing on. So this is a species of skate that hasn't been seen in many years. So to start with, what I'm doing is the art on this side, I'm not clearing and staining them because they're historic specimens and they're some of the last specimens we have of these missing species, is I'm creating these ghostly x-rays and then I'm working on varied ways to print them. But I'm also using crude oil to make these oil paintings. So this is a French-limbed lantern shark that's still missing since the 2010 spill. This is an interesting creature. This is a deep water dragonfish that was only collected once in history. It was seen once in 1960, caught off the coast of Pensacola and never seen again. It looks completely frightening other than the fact the specimen's only a few centimeters long. So this is one in the Smithsonian collection. And a flip side to that is I'm creating these artworks that I'm experimenting. They're either these oil paintings, they're prints, I'm also working on seeing if I can print these as flags so that as I'm traveling to different places, I can put them up very easily at schools and libraries and community centers. But I'm also creating a portable version of Collapse with fishermen and shrimpers in Plaquemines Parish and samples from the Tulane Fish Lab. And this is going on a trailer, which I'll then drive around to, obviously not like this. I'll drive somewhere, I'll set it up at a school or a library or a marina, and then use that again as a point of being able to reach the community and talk to them about this new project and just the diversity in the Gulf. And then of course I need a fishing boat. I need a pirate vessel. So if any of you all happen to have an extra boat, please feel free to reach out. I would love to have one of these. But in seriousness, I am trying to procure maritime vessels so that I can do programming on some of these boats. I'm working with some folks in Plaquemine to hopefully see if, after we sort out what in the world's going to go on with the COVID situation, if we can do some programming off some barges and things like that. So if you've got any suggestions there, please let me know. That's such a challenge to get out on the water and to be able to do programs and even this kind of sampling. So I'm almost done. I wanted to just go back just for a second. So I've been talking about these missing species in the Gulf, and we talked about the extinction crisis, and now, I mean, we find ourselves in this moment with this pandemic, which is considered a zoonotic disease, which is a result, we think, is a result of our species continuing to expand and exploit species. So it transfers. A zoonotic disease is basically a disease that goes from one species into humans, and in some cases can transfer back. So the thinking is that, we have several of these. I mean, there's HIV and Ebola and West Nile, SARS, Lyme disease. There are actually hundreds that have occurred over the last several decades. And largely the thinking is that as ecosystem services start to become compromised, we increase our own risk for these kind of diseases, but we see these diseases emerging in other species too. Amphibians, there are these there's an emerging virus that is fatal. There's an emerging fungus that is fatal. There's these trematode parasites which cause supernumeric limb growth, and then white nose syndrome in bats, and then on and on and on in snakes. So we see these various symptoms of species and ecosystems that are in distress. So again, I'm always thinking like, well, what can we do about that? Who can save biodiversity? Is it going to be politicians? Will it be, I don't know, scientists? Will it be artists? And inevitably, I've come to this conclusion, it's none of those things, but it's all of those things. Of course, we need politicians to do it. Of course, we need scientists involved and people with funding to be involved. But what we really need is all of us, just as human beings, to care and to want to take action, take steps towards protecting this biodiversity. And every time we go shopping, we're voting, right? So what we're consuming, how we're getting ourselves different places, what we're doing in our backyard, what we're growing or not growing, the pesticides we're using or fertilizers or not doing, all of those things have an impact, and they can be very, very beneficial. And one of the things that, as Catherine mentioned, my wife and our two little people, we wanted to try to do whatever we could to make a tiny little difference. So we moved from New York. My wife is French. We wanted to be in a French area in the United States. I wanted to be in a biodiversity, like in an area where there's biodiversity that I'm interested in. And from working during the oil spill, I just fell in love with Louisiana and the people in Louisiana and the nature here. And my little kid loves, our little boy loves fishing, and my little girl's a feral princess. So, it was just it's just a magical place for us to be. And so we wanted to try to do what we could to help the nature here and help, and not only the biological community, but the rural community that we live in. So we bought a little old house with 9 acres of soy field, and immediately started to try to transform it. So the first part was to create this kind of quote unquote eco campus, to create an area where we could do events, and created some wetlands, and then prairie pollinator habitat, and then finally forest and wetland habitat. And so just immediately started replanting and trying to bring that soil, those ecosystems back to life. And so we planted over 1,300 seedlings. That's That's specimen V. That's Victor. That's my big guy who's now 8 years old. This is just a sample of our prairie after I think the second year. And we've planted about 1,300 baby trees. And what's incredible is just that act of removing the soil, removing the pesticide, and starting to regenerate the soil and starting to create habitats. We've just had this tremendous amount of life return. It's so inspiring. It's life wants to persist, and it wants to thrive if we just let it. And we just have had so many monarchs and butterflies and amphibians. And one of the things that Victor and his little sister, who's 3, Lily, have been doing all summer, we've kind of done a nature summer school, and they've created a field guide, and it is completely remarkable using iNaturalist and drawing these animals, how much biodiversity has come back. I mean, in such a short period of time. And then this beautiful creature that Catherine photographed one morning out at the atelier. So painted buntings. This is the 3rd year they've nested here. So it's just so inspiring to see life return. And then that's the second thing is our area. We're in our closest village is Cecilia. We've got I think the statistic is it's almost I think it's 28% or 38% of children are under the national poverty ratio in a 10-mile radius of our home, of the atelier. Secondly, schools in Louisiana are notoriously bad for underprivileged for science education. So the thinking was, well, how do we, you know, inspire science and do informal science education at this eco campus at the atelier. So one of the things is we do bug boot camp, and we did that last year, and we do lots of programs for youth, most of which are free, or we try to find sponsorship for so that it's accessible to everyone. And it's amazing learning from the children, and then being able to impart information back to them. So it's really like art and science and nature. My wife does food programming. We grow food here as well to be able to show. We do foraging, but also lots of biodiversity studies, and then all of it tied together with art and music and even dance. And so trying to make it as multidisciplinary, as engaging as possible. We also do these festivals, which I'm really brokenhearted because I just don't think there's any way we can do it this year. This would have been our 4th year. We've done it for 3 years, and each year it just gets better and more interesting. And the whole thing about these festivals is everything is free. Nobody is selling anything. All the activities are activities. So there, say there are like 40 different tables, artists and like Acadiana Master Naturalists have been there before, Tesh Project, Fish and Wildlife, Wildlife and Fisheries. They all have activities. So when people come, they don't need money. They just need to be open to experiences. So they can do all kinds of different things, arts and crafts and science, hands-on stuff. Lair brings live animals, live reptiles and amphibians. And we have a haunted hayride and all kinds of neat things. And so hopefully you won't be able to join us this year, but hopefully in the future. But that's part of the idea, and just some pictures of what happens. And so we historically have had an amazing turnout. The year before last, we had like 900 people, which was too many. But it was incredible to see so many people come out and become inspired and want to learn more about kind of the wonderful dynamic nature of our community. And there's music and food, and it's a day-long event. And then people started camping. And then recently, in December, we were just so fortunate to rally enough support from patrons to be able to buy an additional 16 acres next door. So what's fascinating, this is all old soy field on this side, and this side is actually old sugarcane field. So this is now probably like a 40 or 50-year-old pine forest with the rows from sugarcane in between. So again, it's kind of revitalized agricultural space, and it's just such an amazing forest already. And so what we're doing is we're working with an RCS and volunteers to remove tallow and try to increase biodiversity. And we've also put in about a half-acre wood duck wetland in the back for turtles and interesting fishes and other things.
Brandon, we have a question about how did you remove the pesticides from the soy fields?
Well, from what I was reading, I was looking, there's this idea of phytoremediation, which is using plants that absorb pesticides. So the two biggest ones that we used were buckwheat and clover. And so I looked at, there's a USDA scientist named Rufus Cheney he's published a bunch of work on removing toxins from soil. And we still need to continue doing it, but that was one of the first things. And that was also to fix some nitrogen in the soil and just kind of get something going. But we really should, we need to go back and analyze to see how much residue is still there. An interesting thing is after the first year, there was still soybeans coming up in the soil, which we try to remove. And now it's all shifted over. There's no soy at all. And it's become really diverse with the kind of grasses that have just kind of gone in and occupied the space. And then just to go back to this for a second, with this new land, part of the idea is to continue doing exactly what we've been doing, but then put trails through the forest, walking trails, because that's something we just don't have in proximity to where we're at. The closest is probably Lake Martin, which is far for people, or the Acadiana Nature Station. So we want to put in trails and hopefully have some places for people to camp, but then also create these kind of ephemeral artworks. So working with artists and community members to try to build artwork out of ephemeral material. So this is one of the sculptures that's there now by a Lafayette-based artist named Marla Kresovich. And so she's making, this is all out of recycled Christmas trees. It's like 80 recycled Christmas trees, which she used to create her sculpture. I apologize, I don't have the finished artwork, but I think it might be in the Advocate article, which I haven't seen yet, unfortunately. But so Marla worked with the Girl Scouts, the Cub Scouts, and then we had these several day events where people came. We actually took trees from downtown Lafayette, like Christmas trees that were going to be, they weren't going to be composted, interestingly, they were going to be thrown away. So we were able to rescue 80 of those, or repurpose 80 of those, and then use the branches to create habitats at the atelier for snakes and things like that, but also then use this to create some of the sculptures that Marla created. So the idea is hopefully with these ephemeral works, they decompose over time, adding nutrients back to the soil, but then also, then we have another artist come along 5 years later and make something else somewhere on the site with the community. And okay, so I think that's everything. I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. I just want to say thank you, but are there any other questions?
Yes, somebody wanted to know if your artwork is on display anywhere where they could see it.
Well, it's supposed to be. That collapse installation is supposed to be touring Louisiana because of the 10-year anniversary of the oil spill. That's the one with all the specimens. And it was supposed to be in New Orleans, and then Baton Rouge, and then Lafayette. So I think it's supposed to go to the Shaw Center. If that's still going to happen, probably next year now. Everything seems to be just kind of continuously pushed. But since you're in Baton Rouge, there is a gallery there called Anne Connolly Fine Art, and she has lots of my pieces, so you can go see them in person, or you can come visit.
Okay, and also someone wanted to know if you can do an adult bug boot camp.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah.
Yay!
Yeah. What I mean, we just got, like so many other folks, we had such big plans for this summer because we wanted to try to do younger age groups and then to try to do like day camp activities for older kids. Um, so yeah, that is the plan. That is the plan. And the other idea is just once things get going again, hopefully we want to just do day programs when people want to come out and just spend a Saturday and do some bird watching or do a snake walk and help us kind of collect data and then do some drawings. So the as of now, though, what we're kind of doing is we've just more or less put everything on hold, I guess, until the spring, till we figure out what's going to happen with how many people we're actually allowed to have out and things like that. But for individuals, just email and you can set up an appointment. Right now, we are doing just appointments, just so we can kind of keep track with how many people are here and things like that. But you're welcome to come.
Where
Absolutely.
can they see one of your Love Motel sculptures at?
Well, there's one. I'm headed up tomorrow to do some research. If I'm hopefully trying to build some locally. The challenge is those. I mean, I should say, if you want to do one in your own backyard, just getting fabric, synthetic fabric works the best. In ultraviolet light, you can set up your own Love Motel for insects, your own moth lighting setup for less than $50. Um, the big ones are a challenge because they have to be kind of structurally engineered and fabricated and with the right kind of metal shop. But I am trying to create one for a park here in Louisiana now, which I probably shouldn't say which one because I haven't been chosen yet, but I'll be going up to present the drawings and the maquette in the next couple weeks. But otherwise, the closest one, we have one out at our place right now, at the Atelier, a small one. And then the biggest one that's nearby is probably in Charlotte, so not very close.
So what would you think about us coming out there to do a bio blitz?
Oh, yeah, I would love it. I've been wanting to do that. That's on my, I would always participate in, I would always be the either frog guy or the fish guy at Bio Blitz in New York City. And I love that idea. So let's please set it up. That would be spectacular.
Okay. And last thing, do you think you might be able to uh, send out to us maybe a very basic kind of bug sculpture we could do for less than $50 in our backyard?
Um, yes. Give me a few days to work up to do that. But yes, for sure. I can show you exactly what because I'm bringing one to this park to the forest tomorrow night, and it's a 12-volt battery. It's a UV LED lights, and then just synthetic fabric that I'm gonna clothespin to trees, just to kind of do a quick study.
And
But
someone else mentioned that maybe we could come out there and camp when we do the bio blitz and do a
sure.
nocturnal naturalist thing as well.
I'd love that. Yeah, that's what we did when Catherine and some
Yeah.
friends came out
Yep.
in the spring. It was great. I would suggest we wait a little bit just because it's so hot and dry right now. We haven't had rain in more than 2 weeks, so everything is really struggling. But
Does
maybe in
anyone else have any questions before we close? Anyone? Oh, someone wanted to know what topic did you write your PhD thesis on?
frogs, well, it was interesting. It was a transdisciplinary program, so I had to combine real biology with some kind of cultural component. That was part of the program. It was a dual Swiss program, so I did my classes in Zurich, Switzerland, but then the PhD came from the University of Plymouth, and they're both programs were really interested in you physically had to make the dissertation address both of these issues. So I spent 3 years in Middle England studying development in agricultural habitats of European common toad, so little toads and being able to show that in agricultural habitats, there were increased levels of deformities, like hind limb deformities, but not for immediate reasons that you would think. I didn't find that it was caused directly by chemicals. What I found is dragonfly larvae and other tiny predators, not big ones, would nip off the limb buds. And they were more prominent in farm ponds, we think, because the farm ponds, the ecosystems weren't functioning naturally. They were eutrophied, and there were all these nutrients coming in and pesticides. Who knows? We don't know. The toad tadpoles might have tasted better because of the pesticides affecting their immune system. There's still a lot of unanswered questions. So I spent 3 years in Middle England and Yorkshire looking at toad populations, and then another 2 years in southern Quebec looking at just anurans. Those are frog and toad populations in, I think it was 15 or 18 different sites through a visiting scientist position at McGill in Quebec, in Montreal. Oh, and I should say, and then I forgot the flip side to that is the art side. I had a series of exhibitions in different places, and it was all related to the amphibian work. And then I also, through those eco actions, worked with folks to generate questionnaires to try to understand if they were learning about amphibians from this experience. And what I found is that the art side, when I didn't do the art side to the eco actions, when there wasn't an art component, people were less engaged. They were still into catching the animals, but they seemed to learn more about the amphibians and just amphibian issues with the art component there, which is part of my argument for why I think art combined with science is like a really good way to get people inspired about conservation.
Well, everyone has thoroughly enjoyed your presentation, and the chat box is full of kudos. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to do this for our organization.
Well, thank you all so much. And I look forward to meeting you in person, all of you someday.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for Nature Notes, and have a wonderful evening.